What would you do if the people who were supposed to love you unconditionally stood up in front of a room full of people and told you that you were nothing? That question used to keep me up at night. Now, I think about it differently. The Harrington Function Suite at the Cowrie Bay Golf and Country Club had been transformed into something out of a magazine spread. Crisp white florals cascaded from every surface, the kind of elaborate arrangements that take a florist team 3 days to assemble. Soft amber lighting bounced off polished glassware and silverware that had probably been hired specifically for the occasion. A string quartet played near the entrance, understated and elegant, welcoming the 120 guests who had driven, flown, or otherwise rearranged their weekends to celebrate my father's 30th year in business. 30 years! It was, by any measure, a significant achievement. My father, Douglas Harrington, had built his property development company from a single site in Tauranga into one of the most recognizable names in New Zealand commercial real estate. He was, depending on who you asked, either a visionary or an operator. Either way, he had made the family wealthy, and he had made sure everyone in that room knew it. I stood near the entrance, holding a glass of sparkling water, wearing a dress I had bought from a small, independent label that most people in this room had never heard of. Around me moved the familiar shapes of my family's world, women in structured blazers and statement jewelry, men in Italian suits, all of them moving with the particular ease of people who have never once had to question whether they belonged somewhere. I was 29 years old. I had attended this country club for events my entire life, and yet somehow, I still felt like a visitor. My name is Clara Whitfield. My mother, Diane Harrington, remarried when I was 3, and Douglas adopted me when I was 7. I grew up a Harrington in name, in address, in school uniform, but I had never quite managed to become one in the way my family seemed to require. My half-brother, Lachlan, was everything they had hoped for in a successor. 32 years old, sharp in a boardroom, already a senior partner at a boutique commercial law firm that worked primarily with developers. He had the kind of confidence that announces itself before the person does. My half-sister, Pippa, was 26, currently managing the social media presence of a luxury hotel group her mother-in-law owned, attending every opening and every gala, photographed at all the right events. She had never worked a 9-to-5 in her life, and somehow made that seem like the reasonable choice. And then there was me. I had spent the last 4 years building something that did not look like anything my family had a reference point for. I had left a comfortable marketing role at a mid-sized Auckland firm, declined an offer to join a colleague's agency, and instead gone very quiet. I had moved into a modest apartment in Te Aro, worked obscene hours, and said very little to anyone about what I was actually doing. My family had filled that silence with their own interpretation. My aunt, Roberta Finch, found me within minutes of my arrival. She was my father's older sister, a woman who wore her opinions the way other women wear perfume generously and without much regard for whether anyone else enjoyed it. "Clara, sweetheart." She touched my arm with the tips of her fingers, as though full contact might be contagious. "You look well. Are you still doing that little online thing?" "I'm still working, yes," I said. Right. She nodded slowly, the way you nod at someone who has just told you something you intend to forget immediately. "You know, Lachlan was telling me the firm has a client services coordinator role coming up. Very solid package, good hours. I could mention your name. That's kind of you," I said. She smiled the smile of someone who considers themselves generous and moved away, already scanning the room for her next conversation. Lachlan materialized at my shoulder about 20 minutes later, glass of scotch in hand, a woman I vaguely recognized from his firm at his side. He introduced her briefly, then turned to me with the particular expression he reserved for conversations about my career. A blend of concern and impatience that he seemed to genuinely believe read as support. "Mum was asking about you earlier," he said. "I've just arrived. You know what she's like before these things. She worries." He paused, then added, "We all do, Clara. Honestly, 4 years is a long time to be spinning your wheels." "I'm not spinning my wheels. I'm not saying it as a criticism. I'm just saying there are people who could help you. Real opportunities. You don't have to keep doing this solo freelance thing, or whatever it is." He said the word freelance the way you might say camping in winter, technically a choice, but not a wise one. I took a sip of my sparkling water and said nothing. Pippa found me near the canapé table sometime after that. She had just had her hair done and was glowing with the particular radiance of someone who had recently been photographed and knew it. She hugged me warmly, because Pippa was genuinely affectionate, which somehow made everything she said after that harder to absorb. "I've been thinking about you actually," she said, picking up a blini and examining it before putting it back. "I spoke to Jonty's cousin. She runs a little communications consultancy, very cute office in Ponsonby. I told her about you, and she said she might have something entry-level. It won't be glamorous, but it's a foot in the door." She looked at me with bright, earnest eyes. "You're still young enough that it's not embarrassing to start at the bottom." I was 29. She was 26. I genuinely could not tell if she registered the irony. "Thank you, Pippa," I said. She squeezed my arm and drifted back toward her husband, who was laughing loudly at something near the bar. A man named Gerald Poole, one of my father's oldest business associates, stopped to chat with me briefly on his way past. He had always been polite to me, in the way that people are polite to the family member they have been told requires delicate handling. "Still finding your feet?" he asked, in a tone of genuine but misplaced kindness. "Something like that," I said. "Good girl," he said, and moved on. I stood quietly and watched the room fill and settle. All these people who had known me for most of my life and had reached a collective, comfortable conclusion about who I was and what I amounted to. The failed one. The one who had squandered the advantages handed to her. The girl who was still, apparently, finding her feet at 29. What none of them knew, what I had told no one in this room, was that 3 weeks earlier, a venture capital firm based in Wellington had led a funding round that valued my company, Hollow Road Studio, at just over $68 million. We were a creative technology company. We built immersive brand environments, digital and physical, for some of the largest retail and hospitality groups operating across Australia and New Zealand. I had started it with a laptop, a sublease on a desk in a shared workspace in Wellington, and 3 years of savings. We now employed 41 people across 2 offices. The announcement had run in a business publication. Not the kind my family read, not the kind that ran in social pages or showed up in golf club conversation. The kind read by people who tracked investment rounds and startup valuations. But that evening, I had arranged for something rather more visible. The Cowrie Bay Golf and Country Club sat on a rise overlooking a marina, and beyond it, a stretch of road that ran into the main commercial strip of the area. On that road, there was a large digital display board managed by an outdoor media company. I had worked with them for 18 months on a campaign for one of our clients. When they had reached out recently about a community spotlight feature for local business leaders, I had said yes. The display had been updated that afternoon. At 9 o'clock precisely, the evening rotation would begin. The function suite had floor-to-ceiling windows along its eastern wall. They faced the marina. And beyond the marina, just visible on a clear night, was that road. I checked my watch. It was 8:47. My father's business partner, a man named Trevor Walsh, called for attention just after 8:30, tapping the side of his glass until the room quietened. The speeches had begun. Trevor spoke for 6 minutes about my father's early years, about the risks he had taken, the deals that had defined him, the reputation he had built. The room listened, with the attentiveness of people who had heard versions of this story many times and still found it satisfying. Then my mother stood up. Diane Harrington was 58 years old and had, over the course of those 58 years, refined herself into something close to architectural. She carried herself with a stillness that other women in the room seemed to reach toward. Her presence at these events was always the centerpiece, even when the evening was technically for someone else. She had prepared for tonight carefully. I could tell from the way she moved to the front of the room, unhurried, certain. 30 years ago, she began, her voice warm and measured, Douglas Harrington bet on himself. And I have spent every year since being grateful that he did. Appreciative murmurs. We built something together. Not just a business, but a family, a set of values, a way of moving through the world with intention and with standards. She looked around the room slowly, as though she were reading it. Lachlan carries that forward every day. His work, his discipline, his commitment to excellence. These are the things that make Douglas and I proud in ways that words don't quite cover. She smiled at Lachlan. He received it gracefully. Pippa brings a different kind of energy to everything she touches. Social, warm, connected, she represents the family in ways that matter more than people sometimes realize. More warmth from the room, then a small pause. Calibrated, theatrical in its precision. Family is complicated, my mother continued, her tone shifting into something that sounded like reluctant honesty. We do not always get what we hope for from every member. We do not always see the returns on the investment we make in our children. Her eyes found me in the room, stayed there. Some people are given every advantage, every opportunity, every connection, and still choose to walk a path that leads nowhere. That is painful for a parent. Deeply painful. The room had gone entirely still. Clara has had every door opened for her. Good schools, a strong network, introductions to people who could have made a real difference to her trajectory. She has declined all of it. For 4 years, she has insisted on pursuing something that has produced nothing visible, nothing measurable, nothing that reflects the values of this family or the opportunities she was given. My mother's voice did not waver. She had practiced this. Your father and I have discussed this at length. We believe that enabling this behavior, continuing to include it in the narrative of what the Harrington family represents, is something we can no longer do. A few people shifted in their seats. Someone near the back coughed. Effective tonight, we are formally removing Clara from the family trust and from any future role in Harrington family business matters. She will not be considered in future estate planning. We wish her well, but we will not continue to hold space for choices that diminish what this family has built. She looked at me directly. Her expression was not cruel. It was composed, which was somehow much worse. We release you to your own path, Clara. Whatever that looks like. Silence. 120 people looked at me. I set down my glass of sparkling water on the nearest surface. I looked at my mother for a moment, then at my father, who was nodding slowly at the tablecloth, as though this were a board resolution being passed. Then at Lachlan, who had gone slightly pale. Then at Pippa, who had a hand over her mouth. Thank you for the clarity, I said quietly. Then I walked toward the eastern wall of windows. The room did not quite know what to do with itself. I heard the low swell of conversation resuming behind me, the sound of a social situation attempting to metabolize something awkward. People looked at their drinks. A few spoke in low voices. Someone laughed nervously and then stopped. I stood at the window and looked out over the marina. At 8:59, I checked my watch. At 9 o'clock, the digital display board on the road beyond the marina completed its cycle and began its new rotation. I watched the screen shift. In white text on a clean, dark background, accompanied by the logo I had spent a week designing 4 years ago in a Wellington studio apartment at 2 in the morning. Hollow Road Studio. NZ's most exciting creative tech company. Congratulations to founder Clara Whitfield on a $68M valuation round, shaping the future of brand experience across Aotearoa and Australia. Below the text, my face. The photograph had been taken 3 weeks earlier in our Wellington office by a photographer the publication had sent. I was standing in front of one of our installations, looking entirely like someone who knew exactly what they were doing. The display was large. The night was clear. The windows were floor to ceiling. I heard the first sharp intake of breath behind me, then another, then the distinct, rising sound of a room trying to recalibrate itself at speed. I did not turn around immediately. I stood at the window and looked at my own face on that board, lit up against the night sky, and I felt something settle inside me that had been restless for a very long time. Is that, someone said behind me? That's Clara. 68 million. Hollow Road. I've heard of them, actually. I turned around. The room was in the particular kind of chaos that happens when a shared understanding collapses. People were on their phones. A group near the window had pressed forward to look. Lachlan was staring at the board with an expression I had never seen on him before, something between disbelief and recalculation. Pippa had tears in her eyes, though I was not yet sure what they meant. Gerald Poole was very still. My mother was standing at the front of the room, exactly where she had been. She had not moved. The composure was still there, technically, but it had taken on the quality of a wall that has just been hit still standing, but with something changed inside it. She made her way across the room toward me. The crowd parted in the way crowds do when they sense a confrontation, and do not want to be too close, but do not want to miss it either. Clara, her voice was lower now. Is this real? Yes. The valuation. The company. This is genuinely yours? I founded it 4 years ago. We announced the funding round 3 weeks ago. It ran in the New Zealand Technology Review. I paused. You don't read that. She stood very still. Something moved across her face that I did not have a name for. Why didn't you tell us? She said. My father had come to stand beside her. He looked older than he had looked 20 minutes ago. Clara, if we had known if you had just told us what you were building, what would have changed? I asked. Neither of them answered. Would you have spoken about me differently at Christmas? Would the conversations about paralegal positions and entry-level coordinator roles not have happened? Would Lachlan have stopped telling me I was spinning my wheels? Would Mum's speech tonight have been different? The room was listening. All of it. 120 people, completely silent. I want to be honest with you, I said, and I meant it. I didn't hide this to embarrass anyone. I hid it because I needed to know. I genuinely needed to know whether any of you were capable of valuing me when I appeared to have nothing. And I think tonight gave me that answer. Lachlan had pushed through to the edge of the circle. He looked at me, and I could see him running through everything he had said to me over 4 years, the accumulated weight of it. Clara. I know, I said, because I did. I knew he had not meant to be cruel. I knew none of them had. That was almost the harder thing to sit with. The trust? The estate planning that's all fixable, my father said. His voice had changed. We can have that reversed. I know that too, I said. That was never really the point. My mother looked at me. Really looked, in a way that felt different from the way she had looked at me all evening, all year, all the years before that. I'm proud of you, she said. It came out quietly, with none of the polish of her earlier speech. It came out like something she had not rehearsed, which meant it was the most honest thing she had said all evening. Thank you, I said. I've wanted to hear that for a long time. I picked up my bag from the table where I had left it. The billboard runs for 6 weeks, I said. It's on the rotation every evening. You'll be able to see it from the eastern windows whenever you're here. I said goodbye to Pippa, who hugged me properly and whispered sorry into my shoulder. I nodded at Lachlan, who looked like he had a great deal to say and had not yet found the order in which to say it. I thanked Trevor Walsh for the nice words about my father's work. Then I walked out of the Harrington Function Suite at the Cowrie Bay Golf and Country Club, through the lobby, with its polished floors and fresh flower arrangements, and out into the cool night air. I sat in my car for a while before I started the engine. Not because I was upset, but because I wanted to feel the weight of what had just happened before the drive back, before the emails and the phone calls and the morning, before all of the next things began. My phone lit up on the passenger seat. Pippa first, then Lachlan, then a number I recognized as my father's. I let them go. I looked out through the windscreen at the sky over the marina, at the edge of the glow from the display board just visible beyond the tree line. There is something they do not prepare you for when you go quiet and build something on your own. They do not tell you that the hardest part is not the work, or the funding, or the uncertainty. The hardest part is carrying the weight of other people's diminished expectations of you. Carrying them every day, not as motivation exactly, but as ballast. And then, one day, setting them down. I had set them down tonight. I started the car and drove south. Here's what I have come to understand, and what I hope is useful to anyone who finds themselves in a version of this situation. The validation of people who only show up when you are visibly winning is not really validation at all. It is a mirror. It reflects their values back at them, not your worth. The people who matter are the ones who treated you with curiosity and respect when your success was invisible. And if you look around and find that list is short, that is important information, not a reason for despair. Choosing an unconventional path will make the people who love you uncomfortable. Some of that discomfort is genuine concern. Most of it is the anxiety of watching someone refuse to use the map that has worked for everyone else. That discomfort is theirs to manage, not yours to resolve by abandoning what you are building. There is also this. The people who dismissed you are not always villains. Often they are simply people whose imagination does not extend to what they have not seen before. That does not make the dismissal hurt less. But it does mean that the story does not have to end in estrangement. It can end in understanding, if both sides are willing. And finally, build the thing. Build it in whatever time you have, in whatever space you can find, with whatever resources are available to you. Do not wait for permission. Do not wait for the people who love you to understand it first. Build it anyway, and trust that the work will eventually speak in a language everyone can hear, even if it takes a billboard.